All right, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Freedom Papers, powered by Turning Point USA, hosted by me, your favorite little history nerd, Morgan Zegers. Today we're going to talk about Federalist Paper number 8 and the anti-Federalist, Federalist debates on the topic of potential domestic threats that we can face and what that would look like for the country. How can we avoid tyranny at home? But before we get into that, first of all, just a reminder, you guys, follow the Freedom Papers Podcast Instagram. It's at Freedom Papers Podcast. And I'm super excited because I love country music and I love conservative commentators and hearing speeches from people that I just love, like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. And I found out from the higher-ups at Turning Point USA that I get a little code. Anybody listening to Freedom Papers, if you use code Morgan at tpusa.com/AmericaFest, you get 25% off your ticket to AmericaFest that's happening right before Christmas here in Phoenix, Arizona. I can't wait to go, and I'm excited to see you guys there. If you haven't gotten your ticket yet, remember you can get 25% off with code Morgan. So I hope you go tpusa.com/AmericaFest. Remember code Morgan. Heck yeah, that's what we want to do. And we're conservatives, right? We love being efficient with funds, right? Always love a good discount. Now, let's get right into it today because I really liked this topic. Like I said, we're talking about Federalist Paper number 8. It's titled The Consequences of Hostilities Between the States. And so not the consequences of if maybe we get invaded, but the consequences of if we're always fighting on American soil with each other. Guess what? It's not good. So just a little recap again. Papers 2 through 5, after that initial introduction paper number 1, papers 2 through 5 were about the dangers that can come from foreign forces. Papers 6 through 7, which we just got through, were about dangers from domestic forces and the causes of dangers between domestic forces and potential conflict on domestic issues. But now this one is going to be the consequences if those dangers then turn into actual conflict. And this is one that I've really been looking forward to because I am sick and tired, and you guys know this by now if you've been listening to the rest of the episodes, I'm sick and tired of hearing these people in the conservative movement, and even on the left too, they do their own crazy stuff, but they want national divorce, they want civil war, they want multiple little confederacies, like 3 or 4 sections, regions, divorced in America so that we're no longer the 50-nifty United States. We are like 3 or 4 confederacies or whatever. Maybe we want to kick California out, or maybe Texas wants to secede, all these different things. It's ridiculous, and I'll tell you what, it's disrespectful to all of the work and all of the thought and all of the serious political debate that went on between the anti-Federalists and the Federalists when they were debating, should we become a union as the United States of America instead of having this current Articles of Confederation where we aren't exactly unified and encouraged to cooperate, even if we are different kinds of people. They already went through this. They looked at all of history, and we're going to see that in this paper. They looked at all of history. They said we need to be together because it's safer from foreign forces. We're safer from domestic issues. And now this paper that we get into today is talking about exactly why it's important to avoid conflict in the first place, because the people suffer. All right? It's not funny. It's not cute. It's not fun to romanticize civil war. It's not a good talking point. Maybe you make some money. Maybe your video goes viral. Maybe your tweet is sassy and it gets a lot of retweets on the internet. I don't care. It's dangerous to talk about. It's not funny at all, and it's because massive people suffer. So let's get right into it. This one's just really good. So we're going to go through a lot of what Publius actually says in this. Hint, though, this is written by Hamilton. It's another one by Hamilton, just like the last few that we've been reading. Okay, so first we're going to get into the introduction of Federalist Paper number 8, written by Publius. He says, assuming it, therefore, as an established truth that the several states, in case of disunion or such combinations of them might as happen to be formed out of the wreck of the general confederacy, would be subject to those vicissitudes of peace and war, of friendship and enmity with each other, which have fallen to the lot of all neighboring nations not united under one government. Let us enter into a concise detail of some of the consequences that would attend to such a situation. So basically, let's look into what happens when countries fight the way we will probably fight if we aren't a unified nation. He goes into talking about Europe again. I know we've talked about Europe again a lot, you guys, but first he provides 2 aspects when we compare ourselves to Europe. Let's see what he said. Publius says war between the states in the first period of their separate existence would be accompanied with much greater distresses than it commonly is in the countries where regular military establishments have long been attained. The disciplined armies always kept on foot on the continent of Europe, though they bear a malignant aspect to liberty and economy, have, notwithstanding, been productive to the signal advantage of rendering such conquests impracticable and of preventing that rapid desolation which used to mark the progress of war prior to their introduction. The art of fortification has contributed to the same ends. The nations of Europe are encircled with chains of fortified places which mutually obstruct invasion. Campaigns are wasted in reducing 2 or 3 frontier garrisons to gain admittance into an enemy's country. Similar impediments occur at every step to exhaust the strength and delay the progress of an invader. Formerly, an invading army would penetrate into the heart of a neighboring country almost as soon as intelligence of its approach could be received. But now, a comparatively small force of disciplined troops acting on the defensive, with the aid of posts, is able to impede and finally to frustrate the enterprises of one much more considerable. The history of war in that quarter of the globe is no longer a history of nations subdued and empires overturned, but of towns taken and retaken, of battles that decide nothing, of retreats more beneficial than victories, of much effort and little acquisition. What is he saying there? He kind of says 2 things. Like I said, there's 2 aspects of comparing America to what's going on in Europe and what has happened there. The first thing that he says is, you guys, in Europe, they have been very well developed for, 1787 at the time. And so all of the little nations there, though they're not, united in any way, they're tiny little bordering nations. And all of them are very fortified now because they've been through centuries of war at this time. They've fought each other so much. Their fortifications are so built up, whether that's protecting the towns or their coast or other ports, everything is so built up to be prepared for defending the cities because they're so used to constantly being invaded that now when a little country invades a little country, you don't really get very far. You just maybe conquer a bordering town. And it's all that really happens is those bordering town people suffer constantly because the warring nations are constantly attacking each other. It's a waste of resources, it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of lives. It hurts the people most because they're constantly warring and nothing is really getting accomplished. It's not like one country can really invade and conquer another country anymore. They're too fortified. But when you look at America, what Publius is saying is that's in England and that's in Europe and all those countries over there. We don't have any fortifications. And so what would that look like for us? We would look like back when Europe didn't have these fortifications. We would have states easily be able to invade each other pretty quickly because there's like no fortifications. Some states have a lot of people. Some states aren't really very developed or populated yet. And so it would be really quick for a state or a tiny country or confederacy to invade another one, take it over, harm all the people, do all the things that come with war. But then guess what's even worse? Then that same country with no fortifications, again, could easily be invaded by the next higher power and the next. And it's this endless cycle because we aren't a fortified land yet. And so you can get invaded quite aggressively, and then you could also get re-invaded by another force quite aggressively. It's just damaging, and it's a part of the cycle that Europe went through for centuries. So the next thing is that it's not like this is going to really hurt the political classes of these big countries or these small countries that are always fighting if we did do this on American land. Instead, it's the people. Okay, he makes the case that this is the real consequence of constant fighting, especially on our own land. The people are going to suffer the most, and that's something we have to consider if we have this constant cycle. Now, moving on to the next part, Publius says, in this country, the scene would be altogether reversed. The jealousy of military establishments would postpone them as long as possible. The want of fortifications, leaving the frontiers of one state open to another, would facilitate inroads. The populous states would, with little difficulty, overrun their less populous neighbors. Conquest would be as easy to be made as difficult to be retained. War, therefore, would be desultory and predatory. Plunder and devastation ever march in the train of irregulars. The calamities of individuals would make the principal figure in the events which would characterize our military exploits. So basically, again, Publius is just hammering home that the people are going to suffer most, that because we are not exactly developed yet, the more powerful states or more populated states will invade the others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that then those more powerful states will remain safe. Instead, they're just as susceptible to a future invasion. And so it's going to create an endless cycle that was seen throughout history, especially in Europe. Now, the next part is a very important part that I want to talk to you guys about. And this is kind of getting away from, 1787 times, and we're going to look a little bit more, flash forward a couple centuries, or maybe just 1 or 2 centuries, you know what I'm saying? We're going to talk about what it means to sacrifice liberty in the attempt to feel secure and feel safe. Sound familiar? Sound like something we're going through right now? Anybody? But basically, the next point that is really, really important, it's a key lesson in Federalist paper number 8, is that as bad as this will be for people, they still have this tendency, it's the tendency of mankind and human nature, that to sacrifice liberty in order to feel safe. As bad as that will be, Publius says, even though it's not in their best interest in the long term, people will give up liberty for that sense of safety. And what he says is that internal weakness in our nation, when we are all infighting, when we aren't strong as a unified country, we are going to invite external dangers. So this is something that I wanted to add into this episode. It's not necessarily related to 1787 or the ratification debates, but it is in a way. It's something that I have been saying in speeches ever since I got started in politics in 2019. Before COVID, pre-COVID, little Morgan, was going on these little tiny college campus speeches, and I would talk to students, and I called it like Commie Fighting 101, and I would basically give lessons on the history of radical leftism on the rise, what it's done to countries. I would talk about the groups in America today and how their tactics are similar to the tactics used throughout history by the same socialists and communists. And then I would talk about, of course, the solutions, because I like to be solutions-oriented. So when I talked about the groups and then I talked about the tactics, one of my favorite tactics, on top of the first two, it would be like distorting language, playing with words, changing the meanings of basic definitions, and that is straight out of The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. Friedrich Hayek wrote that maybe 100 years ago and literally 100 years ago he's saying, guys, socialists will change the meanings of basic words, watch out for it. And then look at America today, where the socialists are saying they're going to bring progress and justice and morality and equity and equality and all the fluffy words. But not only that, they change things like, herd immunity or sexual preference. Remember when Amy Coney Barrett was testifying before she became a Supreme Court judge, and the left all of a sudden, even though President Joe Biden, who wasn't president at the time, and Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they used to always say things like sexual preference. Well, Amy Coney Barrett said sexual preference during her time as she was in front of the Senate to become a Supreme Court justice herself. And oh my gosh, the mainstream media, the leftist senators that were there on the Hill, the liberal senators that were on the Hill. And then all of a sudden, all these activists started saying that she was an evil woman that hated the LGBTQ community because she used the term sexual preference. When she was asked about it, she was asked about it, and she said something really nice. She was like, you know what? I won't judge someone for their sexual preference. Bada bing, bada boom. You think they'd be okay with that, but instead they acted like the world was ending, and I kid you not, after all this uproar was manufactured by the radical left, guess what they did? Merriam-Webster Dictionary changed the definition of sexual preference in the website within 24 hours of this all happening to have a little asterisk on it now that says term is offensive. It's like exactly what Hayek said the radical left will do in a country as they come to power. The second thing that they do is Marxism. Okay, so they divide and conquer the population by pitting the working class against the owning class. What we have now in America today is really cultural Marxism. People also say that Hitler was a cultural Marxist because he did say that he loved the concept of Marxism. There is evidence that he used to read Marx and that he used to admire that concept, but he cared about it in the sense of culture, and by that it wasn't pitting the working class against the owning class in terms of class definition. Instead, he was pitting people against the Jews. And so what that did is it divides the population so that people can conquer, they're weaker, and they attack one in order to have this little revolution. It's a whole thing. But in America today, we have cultural Marxism in a different sense, and that's because we have this woke politics, these political identities, all these new things and words and pronouns and stuff are coming up, and we are easily divided not just by the rich versus the poor or the workers versus the owners, the way it's always been throughout history. Instead, they're dividing us on skin color and our gender, our sexual orientation, our religion, all the things. And the cultural Marxists are just having a blast. That is why Black Lives Matter literally said we are Marxists. We are trained Marxists. The co-founders of this organization said we are trained Marxists. how come it's so obvious and we still have to like try and beg people to pay attention? I don't know. But so I talk about the distortion of language a lot. I talk about Marxism a lot, but another thing that the left has always done is they love to seize the opportunity of a crisis. You know what I'm saying? So they love to find a population that is scared. And then when the population is scared and the population feels insecure and they want to feel safe, they want a sense of normalcy, they want to feel security like they used to, they'll say, hey, I've got some crazy ideas, but I think that they might give you some sense of safety, some sense of security. It might be a little out of your comfort zone. And what happens is the people's mindset is so disoriented and they are no longer thinking properly in terms of what's right versus what's wrong, that they are willing to embrace more radical changes in policy like a socialist or a communist would put out to them. And so then when you have this crisis, it's pushed further and further by the media as well, and we see that in America today. Now, what I used to talk about before COVID was climate change, right? I mean, they would tell us that the world is going to end in 10 years unless we pass the Green New Deal. And then AOC's chief of staff later admitted that the Green New Deal was written as an economic transformation plan for the United States of America. Hello. And then they made it about climate change. They made it about the environment. That's a little disturbing considering they're saying that the world's going to end unless we pass this specific piece of legislation. So that's one way. They manufactured this crisis, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be good to the environment. I'm not saying that all of it is a lie. I'm just saying that they are using this and saying the world is ending unless we support this policy. AOC will get on stage. She's a fellow young woman. Okay, I'm 25. She's what, 30? She gets on stage and she will cry saying she's scared to bring children into the world because she's scared to become a mother because she doesn't want her kids to die of climate apocalypse. Are you kidding me? Okay, that is fear-mongering at its finest. But it's not something new for these socialists. It's another trend that we've seen throughout history. And that's where this little story of Vladimir Lenin comes in. So, and I promise I'll connect all of this to the Federalist Papers, all right? I know I'm getting there. This is a long cycle, a long circle here. So Vladimir Lenin, he was very much like a Bernie Sanders. You know what I'm saying? Where Bernie Sanders is a millionaire with 3 houses, but he says we're going to like eat the rich and all this stuff and that we're going to attack the rich, make them pay their fair share. And he says those evil millionaires and billionaires out there, he just really wants to be a man of the people, but he's not, okay? I don't know. It's maybe like he's playing us. Well, Vladimir Lenin was very much similar. He was also a man of the people, a communist, all this stuff. And he said he was going to like help the workers of the world unite. And he eventually led to the creation of the USSR, which led to the deaths of millions and the oppression of millions. But Vladimir Lenin was, again, he was super against rich people, but also kind of a rich person. He had access to a lot of food and resources and services at the time that most Russians didn't have available to them. Now, in 1891, there was a famine that hit Russia, and of course, the history books are a little sketchy on like what the actual death numbers are, okay? But the records, pretty much, I was looking into it, show that up to 5 million people probably died in this famine. So a lot of people. Now, Vladimir Lenin is later on record, and I watched a whole documentary on it. It was really cool on YouTube. But he's on the record talking about how, yeah, people in my community were dying, but I specifically did nothing because I knew that for my communist goals to be implemented in Russia one day, the people around me in my community would have to feel so bad, so nervous for the future, so scared and so insecure that they would be willing to embrace the radical ideas that I had planned for them. Okay, I knew they weren't going to want to do it in a normal state of mind, so I wanted to get them all freaked out, and I thought that the famine would help, and so that's why I didn't help people. That's sick. That is sick, okay? And so that's the communist leader right there, right? Now, keeping that in mind, look at what happened with COVID-19. Okay, so like I used to talk about the manufactured crisis that is climate change. Now we have this crisis of the pandemic and all these things. And of course, people are scared. They might lose their life. Their loved ones might lose their life. Look at all the liberties we've given up. And I feel like I don't have to rant too long on this, you guys. It's pretty clear, okay? We feel scared. When over the last 2 years, we have given up so much liberty and freedom from our lives. We're basically now a country of authoritarianism and tyranny. It's disgusting. But that's kind of what's going on in the real world. Now, if we take that same mindset of people when they're scared, think of us in COVID right now. People when they're scared will give up power over their own life, give up their liberty. People will give up their liberty. People will give up their freedoms in exchange for feeling some sense of comfort and safety. Let's take that back to 1787. What were our founders saying? Our founders, they were arguing about what would lead to monarchy, creating a union under the Constitution or remaining or becoming a fully disunited country without the Articles of Confederation, which was our current form of government. So the anti-federalists were worried that if we created this strong central government, if we did ratify the U.S. Constitution, we would be creating a power that is strong enough to become a monarchy, that will become tyrannical, and that will basically be like a whole other King George from England that we would have to deal with again after we just won the Revolutionary War. So I understand they were nervous about this happening, right? It makes total sense. I respect their concerns. But our founders, I really like their approach on this, or I should say the Federalists. I really like the Federalist approach on this because they address the concerns of the anti-federalists saying, listen, we know that you're worried about monarchy. We know you're worried about tyranny. We think, though, that if we don't remain, or if we don't continue by ratifying the Constitution and becoming a union, all of us joining together, we think that's going to be the quickest way for us to achieve another monarchy on American soil, or tyranny at least. And their reasoning is that because of all the conflicts that we've talked about, I mean, think of papers 2 through 5, the foreign dangers that could come, think of papers 6 through 7, the domestic dangers that could come. What they were saying is, look at all these dangers that are going to come to us, all of these potential conflicts and wars that will arise. What's going to happen if we are a bunch of smaller entities of confederacies or states? What's going to happen is that because there's always the risk of being invaded, whether that's from domestic forces or foreign, the people in these smaller confederacies will be much more willing to give power to the military and to their political leaders in exchange for the safety and security of being constantly protected, because it's going to look like Europe where they're constantly at war. That's going to be us. That's going to be us soon if we don't unite under the Constitution. And it's going to invite a situation where people are scared and they say, you know what, if I've got to give up some liberty and give more power to the military, more resources, more money or whatever it takes to the government or to the military that's protecting us, I would much rather do that. That is how you invite monarchy and tyranny into your land. And so I really, really love that angle because it's addressing the concerns of your political opponent. It's saying, I respect your concerns, but here you go. And I think that is a strong comeback. Now, here's the thing. What I also love about this, and this is what is so forgotten, I have a little rant, okay? I have a rant. I was just at a school board meeting, and basically the school board, we've all heard about what's going on with the FBI, right? The FBI has been saying after the Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that he's going to weaponize the FBI against concerned parents that are going to school board meetings and stuff. Now you have school boards that are saying, oh, we're scared by the parents that are attacking us. It's so dishonest. It's so ridiculous that this is what our federal government is doing with our taxpayer dollars and resources. But I went to the school board meeting, and guess what? It's another situation of a school board president had an entire dossier on like 50 parents and children in the district that were speaking out about COVID and about the critical race theory and about all the stuff they were dissatisfied with by the district. The president of the school board, had a 50-person dossier that had divorce records, mortgage information on people's houses, license plate numbers, and get this, pictures of the parents and children all on this Google Drive. It's really disgusting. So what do you know? We had some good, awesome community gathering, and a bunch of community members and parents and kids were at this school board meeting to hold the guy accountable. What do you know? They lock every single person out, and they only allow 30 people inside. Those would be the only people allowed to speak. And so they're severely limiting our ability to be taxpayers that care about what's going on in our community and voicing our concerns to public officials. That's the whole point of America, okay? The people have the power. Now, what our founders talk about next in Federalist Paper number 8 is the idea that the people, if they are aware of their power, they will be strong enough to protect themselves and provide a check on any authority, not just political authority, but military authority. And this idea of the people having a certain amount of power and being able to provide the check, not just like, okay, our state powers provide a check on the federal government, and then at our federal level, we have the 3 branches of government that provide checks on the others. The people are also supposed to be a part of this equation of checks and balances, and Americans have forgotten this. So I went and I'm trying to get into this building because they have this huge gate right at the school board meeting. And it looks like this really authoritarian looking gate where they like slammed it shut all the time. So I went up and I was like, hello, sir, I have to go to the bathroom. Is there any way I could be let in? And he goes, no, sorry, but there's a Circle K down the road. And I was like, oh, we aren't allowed inside? And then I'm like, gotta have some fun with this. So I was like, we aren't allowed inside the building? And he was like, no. And I was like, oh, why not? And I'm trying to act all innocent. And he goes, Well, there's a meeting inside. And I was like, yeah, I heard they're only letting a certain number of people in, right? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, is that because of COVID? Or how come we have to stand out here and we can't go inside to see the meeting? And he was like, well, it's live streamed. And I was like, yeah, but why? Like, do you know why we're not allowed to go experience the meeting in person? And he was like, no. And I was like, is it because of COVID? Is it because of the limiting the number of people in the room? And he goes, maybe. And I was like, is it because of this event? Do they just not want these people inside? And he goes, I guess a little bit of both. And I said, okay, so you're the one guarding the gate saying that parents can't get in. Do you know who made this rule? And he looks at me and he goes, no. And he's just so nonchalant about it. He's like, no, I don't know. And I was like, you don't know like who made the rule of who not allowing all these people inside? There's like hundreds out here and we're only 30 people in. You don't know who told you to keep this gate closed and not let anybody in to see what's going on with the government officials that are representing the people out here? He said, no. And he was so nonchalant. So I just decided to smile and look at him and say, I feel like you should know that. And then I walked away and I felt pretty happy with myself. But that's what I'm so frustrated by. When did this dangerous complacency get all the way down to the local level so far as for security guards to not even know what they're guarding concerned parents from for a school board district meeting? Are you kidding me? What kind of power trip is that for the school board district people to tell security guards to keep concerned parents out there? So what the founders were worried about back then is that if we had these situations of people being scared and giving too much power to the military, the people would start to lose the concept that they do have power to check the military, and the military would gain too much power, and the people wouldn't be able to provide that check anymore because they would start to lose the purpose and the vision of what America was meant to be, of the people having power in the first place. And next thing you know, one step after another, people just start to forget the common principles, and you are down the road to tyranny once again, which can lead to monarchy, which the Anti-Federalists were worried about for the most part. Okay. So this is what I find really interesting as well, and it's kind of the last part of paper number 8. It talks about how, listen guys, we should look at our competition. We aren't just always going to be the victim here. We have to look at ourselves as the potential leaders of the future world that is going to come as we become a potential world superpower. What he says is, Europe isn't exactly an issue for us. You know what I'm saying? He basically is like, look at those guys. This is exactly why we shouldn't do what they do. This is exactly why we should unite, because those guys are fighting each other all the time. They're disunited. They're always attacking each other. They're wasting their money. They're wasting their time. They're wasting their resources, and their people are always hurting because they're always at war. Guess what that makes them? Not a threat to us. They are far away from us across the ocean. It would take them forever to come here. It would be a waste of their time. They're always in their little silly individual wars. And so they're not really a problem. What Publius says is, because they're not a problem, how serious are our threats of potential foreign invasion and threat? And he says, honestly, not a lot. Because we've got a lot of potential. Europe's over there solving their own problems. Really, the only situation that we could face right now, the only way that we could experience a situation of non-peace is if we don't properly establish a government that it could encourage cooperation. It's up to us because we have a potential of achieving a great moment of peace that lasts centuries long. And it's a really beautiful statement what he says. And so I kind of love it. He's like, there's a chance for us to actually secure longevity of peace. And it's so exciting because first of all, it makes the case once again of why it's bad to be disunited, why it's bad to be small little countries. Because look, then your enemies, like we are looking at Europe, we say, oh, we can't worry about them. Like they're just doing their own little problems. They're weak. They aren't competition to us anymore. And now the only thing that can stop us from achieving greatness is if we fail to come together on a solid foundation of government that is of, by, and for the people, that will secure our ability to not always fight with each other and become weak like Europe and the rest of the countries. And so what a strong way to finish. I really loved it. And to kind of wrap up this paper, you guys, I want to read one last thing by Publius. He says, this is an idea not superficial nor futile, but solid and weighty. It deserves the most serious and mature consideration of every prudent and honest man of whatever party. If such men will make a firm and solemn pause and meditate If such men will make a firm and solemn pause and meditate dispassionately on the importance of this interesting idea, if they will contemplate it in all its attitudes and trace it to all of its consequences, they will not hesitate to part with trivial objections to a constitution, the rejection of which would in all probability put a final period to the Union. The airy phantoms that flit before the distempered imaginations of some of its adversaries would quickly give place to the more substantial prospects of dangers, real, certain, and formidable. Publius. So what he's saying there, if we really put our minds to this, if we really meditate on this, if we evaluate all the circumstances and all the facts of history, it's going to be pretty clear for us that the best way to achieve peace and strength and success in the future, for the future of the United States of America, it's going to be by ratifying the U.S. Constitution. I love history. I'm a history nerd, and I can't really tell you any more than that I think it's fantastic that our founders looked to the ancient Rome, looked to the ancient Greece, looked to all of the attempts at republics and said, how can we avoid the conflicts that these people went through? How can we avoid trials and tribulations? And obviously, not everything's unavoidable, but how can we limit these risks? Now, my quick thought before we wrap this up, before I say goodbye to you guys, I just want to bring this up. It's hard to not, okay? When we talk about why it's important, the consequences of domestic quarrels, the consequences of domestic conflict, just to remind you guys, one of the most profound tweets that I had seen in a while was about Afghanistan, and it said something along the lines of, how lucky are we, how blessed are we to be in America today, where we could lose a war after fighting for 20 years and not a single thing of our day-to-day lives changes. Wow. And that's because we don't have that conflict on our soil. It's because we're so detached from reality that we just lost a war in Afghanistan, a massive devastation, millions, billions of dollars of equipment still over there. It was a massive failure. Has your life changed at all, other than seeing the sad stories online, other than maybe hearing about the interpreters, the allies, the citizens that are stuck over there behind enemy lines, just seeing it on the news? Our day-to-day lives have not changed one bit. But what's going on in Afghanistan, now that that country's embroiled in yet another conflict, and by that I mean the Taliban has taken over. It's what would happen if we had war on our soil. Right now, just looking at it, I mean, look how many foreign countries are now inserting themselves just to exploit the country, rip out any important resources, minerals, like China. They just spent billions of dollars on minerals that they paid to the Taliban. But how many countries right now are saying, ooh, I could make some profit with this. Ooh, I could get self-interested profits out of this country as it's in its worst times. What about this? There's a story by CNN that a 9-year-old child was sold to a 55-year-old man with a bright white beard. I'm sure everybody saw this. I posted it onto my Instagram. A child sex slave, okay? CNN, I don't know why in God's name they documented this and didn't offer to pay the $5,000 or the $2,000 I think that it was for the child. I think, yeah, the child was sold for $2,000 to a man, a 9-year-old to a man, and CNN documented the wedding and then documented the girl getting dragged across the sand away from her family, away from her mom, and she's digging her heels in the dirt, and the old man's grabbing her little arm, and guess what happened to that girl probably? I'm not going to say it, but you know what happened. Now, why did CNN film that and not say, hey, our camera equipment is like 5 million times the cost of this child. Let's save her and bring her as a refugee to America. I don't know. But that's the kind of stuff that happens when you're war-torn. And that's what the Federalists also reference. That's what Publius references. He says the women and the children and the boys that are going to succumb to the violence of the conquering winners that come in and take over whenever one side wins, it's not good. It's not just the soldiers that die. It's not just the politicians that lose a battle, whatever it is. It's the civilians that suffer. And we see that in Afghanistan now. What makes me so sad right now is knowing this. Think about how cold it's getting, okay? It's going to get really cold in Afghanistan, too. Winter's coming. The infrastructure is completely collapsed in Afghanistan. There's no government structure, really, to help these people. And right now, the worry is that none of them have the infrastructure that's needed to survive the winter, and especially to feed themselves during this cold time. So that's what they're dealing with now, because a war was just lost on their land. It's not a silly little colloquial thing that we can all talk about behind microphones. It's a serious thing that affects people's lives. That's what's going on in Afghanistan. I encourage you guys to learn about it and educate yourselves on it so you can see what would happen if we had civil war, or if we had national divorce or anything. We would just fight each other and look like Afghanistan eventually. Now, sorry to end on a bad note, but that's how it is, okay? No more Civil War talk, no more national divorce talk, no more romanticizing it. Next week, we're going to talk about paper number 9. We're going to have my friend Connor Clegg on, okay? We're going to talk about an exciting topic, talking about factions, talking about Civil War again, talking about a lot of current events. So I'm excited to bring him on. But again, you guys go to tpusa.com/AmericaFest. Use code Morgan for 25% off. Connor will be there. I'll be there. Alex will be there. Everybody from Freedom Papers will be there. Everybody from Turning Point. Buy your own copy of the book. And make sure to follow us on Instagram at Freedom Papers Podcast on Instagram. All right. See you later. Thank you so much.